So here we are. It's now Sunday, the 28th of February, 2021. The time is now just 6:30 in the evening here in Dublin. So there were protests in Dublin yesterday, and it's interesting to see the response to them from numerous parties. Um, I would remind people of the film They Live. It's a very interesting film from about 2007. It was, and it was an adaptation of Stephen King's short story. I tried to read the short story, but the film was so much easier to follow. I don't think Stephen King is a very cogent writer. He's a big fan base, but I prefer a little bit more brevity and clarity in writing. Anyway, that's not relevant. We are now, and I've spoken at length about They Live before. I should do a video critique of it, but we are now at the stage of the people be running around the supermarket with all of the here's a plot spoiler, all of the invaders coming in. So there's hysteria going on at the moment, and there's misinformation going on at the moment, and there's lying going on at the moment. And the usual suspects are coming out with the usual lies. In other words, the establishment woke politicians and the establishment woke media are telling us that this is the ugly face of the far right in Ireland. It's interesting to see how the professional race baiting NGOs have come out so quickly. One of their major proponents, Fergus Finlay. Fergus Finlay is very heavily embedded in the Irish NGO industry, talking about horrific scenes. Horrific. According to what happened at Tiananmen Square, that was horrific. Although even that is now further questioned. But nobody died yesterday, and I gather that 13 arrests were made. At the same time, we're also seeing that the people who attended the retirement party for a colleague in RTE, the Gardaí have recommended that no charges be pressed against them. This is also the line taken by the present occupier of the role of Taoiseach Micheál Martin. No, nothing should happen to them. This is despite the fact that these same people in RTE have spent over a year spreading scaremongering and spreading fear among people who are still gullible enough to actually believe anything on RTE. And when you say to people, okay, I was talking to a woman a while ago and she said, look at those kids in Spanish Arch and what they did. I said, look at those people in RTE and what they did. Now she said, you're being silly. How? Well, you know what I mean? No, I said, I don't know what you mean. I said, because those people in RTE, unlike the kids in Spanish Arch, the people in RTE have been promoting a line of stay safe, stay at home, big lockdown, yet at the same time they've shown that they don't believe the lies that they're propagating. Here's something interesting. Last week, my mother and father, who are 90 and 91 years old respectively, got tested for COVID. This must be seen in the context of them having taken no precautions, me having taken no precautions, not following the guidelines, me having not worn a mask once, them having not worn a mask once. We haven't broken the law, by the way. This is where the woke mainstream media come in and say that people who don't wear a mask are immediately far-right criminals. I'm not far-right and I'm not a criminal. All right, let's establish that one. But I didn't wear a mask and I didn't adhere to any of the guidelines in reference to COVID-19. So my parents got COVID tested last week and they both discovered that both of them are entirely negative. So, I have a feeling we're not being told the full story here. My parents are vulnerable. They're what you would call vulnerable. Again, this woman said, how are you caring for your parents through all of this? I said, by pretending it's not happening. Oh, no, seriously, she said. No, I'm serious. I said, by pretending it's not happening. Well, that's not a joke, I said, by pretending it's not happening. Look at the mist. Look at what happened to the people who pretended it didn't happen, or the likes of Mrs. Carmody, who was aware that it was happening but still wasn't bothered by it particularly. Thomas Sheridan put up a post. He said, this country isn't run by people who are incompetent. It is run by evil psychopaths. That's right. But I twigged that long ago. I twigged that. I was firm about that in my head by the end of 2012. And at the risk of being boastful, there's no lonelier place than being ahead of your time. It is a very lonely place because I was ahead of my time. I saw through them in 2012. I saw through them again with another specific incident, I should say, in 2014. So It's very easy now for us all to say, oh, well, we were right, except for the fact that we were right. And it's hard. And a lot of us, okay, we're out here, we've seen more, we're red-pilled, we're wearing the black glasses, etc. That doesn't mean it's easy. It's been easier for me than most. I'm very thankful, but at the same time, we are recovering as well. We have been abused by evil psychopaths. But part of the transition and part of the recovery process is recognising first and foremost that these are evil psychopaths. Thomas says they're not incompetent. I disagree with them. They are incompetent because they wouldn't be psychopaths if they weren't. Or maybe I should have that the other way around. All psychopaths are incompetent. So what we're seeing on the establishment mainstream woke media today is that, you know, what happened in Dublin was akin to, I don't know, Bloody Friday in Belfast, or the poll tax riots in London in 1990 that saw off Margaret Thatcher. Those kind of... Yes, a dreadful. Man releases firework. I have no idea who that man in the white hoodie who released a firework is or where he came from. Honestly, I cannot speculate about where that particular thing came from. But this leads on to the next thing. Michael Collins destroyed British rule in Ireland, in what would become the 26 counties that would become the Irish Free State, and then Éire, and then the Republic of Ireland. It was Michael Collins who did it. The men of 1916 started it. They laid down their lives. But Michael Collins formulated what they were doing. And Collins would, I feel, today be telling us, this group, us, would be telling us to avoid protests. I avoid protests for what happened yesterday. Thomas has advocated in the past avoiding protests. I think what happened yesterday vindicates him and it vindicates me. Civil disobedience is not about going to protests. Civil disobedience is a far different thing, and in many regards it's much less easy. Because when you go into civil disobedience as a policy and you've worked it out in your head, you are at risk of being prosecuted. So, for example, with my not wearing a mask, somebody called the Gardaí on me in the shops. I could technically have been prosecuted for that. I probably would have been acquitted because I had claimed my exemptions. The shop didn't want me prosecuted. They didn't want me to leave. So it wasn't even a question of them being able to say, well, you're trespassing or you're being abusive in a public area or you're not moving on when the Gardaí tell you to. The Gardaí did not tell me to move on when they came. They just said, there's nothing here. They said, we don't see that. The shop have told us that they don't have a problem with you, so we're leaving it at that. Yeah, thanks, I said. I was courteous to the Gardaí. But that's civil disobedience. My not wearing a mask whenever I go to the shops is civil disobedience, in a sense, although it's actually legal and lawful as well. I'm not breaking the law. But if you're going to go into civil disobedience, then you have to be aware that in some instances you are breaking the law. Now, if we look at the Holocaust was legal according to the German statutory code. That was everything that they did in the Holocaust was lawful and legal. But it doesn't mean it was right. So anybody who broke the law then was doing the right thing, at least morally. So this means that sometimes civil disobedience crosses over the line into being breaking the law. If you do that, you must do it with your eyes open. So, for example, in 2014, we had the Cretins in Direct Democracy Ireland saying to people that if you sent back your Irish water bill marked no contract, no consent, return to sender, I do not have an international contract, blah, blah, blah with you, that would get you out of it. No, it wouldn't. What you're doing is you're proving to Irish Water that you got it in the first place. Whereas if you get that bill and burn it, unless they've served it on you by registered post, they can't prove you got it. Same with the TV licence. Now, I'm not giving people legal advice with the TV licence. But if you don't pay your TV licence, you're breaking the law. All right? That is legal advice. If you don't pay your TV licence, you're breaking the law. Now, if you choose as a matter of civil disobedience not to pay your TV licence, then you are embarking, and you should do so with reasoned consent, shall we say, on an avenue that could see you being prosecuted in the district court for not paying your TV licence. Now, there are a number of things that you can raise in your defence, such as the fact that you didn't get the summons. But if you show up in court, that's a problem. It's long established in the High Court and beyond that whether you've been summoned or not, if you've shown up in the case, you should consider yourself party and you're in. Don't show up in court if you haven't been summoned or if you don't have any recollection of getting the summons. Right? So there are these issues of service. And that's the same with the Irish Water Bill. If you sent it back to Irish Water with all of this rubbish that was incited by Direct Democracy Ireland and certain others, then you're telling them, you're proving that you've been served, and they'll use it against you, and they did. It wasn't enough people, not enough people followed Direct Democracy Ireland's incitement to break the boycott to actually defeat the boycott, but it was a risk, and I was speaking out about it then, and this is why that was the point really at which the free men on the land and the pseudo-lawyers and all these ones came onto my radar. They've never been off since. They're evil. And there's a lot of psychopaths. Interestingly, Garda Plant D Wall has a woman, a very gullible English woman on, who used all the free man on the land stuff. You'd almost think that this is a strategy that they, inverted commas, have whenever they see something coming around. Let's throw the free man on the land stuff at it, because it always defeats those who use it. The family in Strokestown, defeat it. Anybody who's used it in court, defeat it. The free man on the land stuff, I can give you, and I know this, I can give you the percentage of court cases and prosecutions where the free man and the land stuff has worked. It is 0. Now, they'll still argue with you, but they're victims of a cult. Every bit as much victims of a cult, possibly more, even than the COVID ones. Why more so? Because the COVID cult has been pushed relentlessly by the mainstream media, both in Ireland and internationally. People have to forgive themselves for buying into it. Whereas the free man and the land thing was never pushed by anybody in the mainstream. So, it came and found people. It's remarkable the people it found. There's consistency. But it's very different in its character. The cult of free men and the land, pseudo-law, is very different in its character from the cult of COVID. We are the people on the outside of the cult calling out to those inside saying it's okay. Come out, come and join us. I've said this before, I say it in all earnestness. Do not condemn. Forgive. As I said a moment ago, when you have a barrage of propaganda from mainstream media, RTE, the Irish Times particularly, and all of these others, both nationally and internationally, telling you that there's this pandemic going around that's going to kill everybody, then you can be forgiven if you were part of that big mainstream who bought into RTE. There's a generation of people and a class of people in this country. I've called them Ray and Maura from Temple Oak or Terranure. People thought, when I was talking about Ray and Maura, I was talking about people in their 40s. I'm talking about people in their 70s. There's a particular Dublin, I suppose Cork, Limerick, Galway, social class. Their kids now would be my age, their 40s, Ray and Maura. My parents had me late. They were 43 when they had me. So actually, technically, chronologically, my parents should be my grandparents. But the Ray and Maura class would be 70s. And they live in kind of Cypress Grove in Temple Oak. or Griffith Avenue Extension down in Ballymun. They call it Class 7, but it's Ballymun. Really, it's Ballymun. And, they are a blindly accepting middle class, Ray and Maura. They live in nice houses, Ray might have been a middle manager and Maura became a housewife. I don't know what Maura did before she got married, but it's Ray and Maura, because you don't have people of my generation in the 40s called Ray and Maura. They're older people's names. George and Mildred. You don't have people of that name now. So this is the social class I'm talking about, and they've been very badly targeted by the propaganda regarding COVID-19. Very badly targeted, and they're to be forgiven. Seriously, they're to be forgiven. They're not to be mocked or scorned. Maybe I sound like I was in this video or in previous instances, but I'm not. They're just people who did their best and who got their home in Temple Oak or Terranure or Clontarf or wherever. They didn't expect this. But it's their kids now, Dermot and Karen. It's their kids who are facing utter ruin, because they would probably have a big mortgage and a house somewhere, Clontarf or Ranelagh, what have you. They're into veganism and climate change. And they have listened to the narrative because Ray and Maura listened to the narrative, and they were never taught in school, or they were never taught as kids to think critically and to question everything. If you have children who question everything, you don't need to worry about anything else. Everything, as in question everything. But this is where we're at, and that is the whole demographic, both the Ray and Maura and their kids and their grandchildren, Jack and Sophie. They're the ones who the Irish Times and RTE targeted relentlessly. They didn't target me. It's the same way Mrs. Carmody in the supermarket wasn't attacked by the invaders. They knew. They knew. I haven't got into trouble for not wearing a mask. Somebody recently said to me, "Oh, aren't you a rebel for not wearing a mask?" No, I said, because I'm not breaking the law. I wasn't having that. She thought she was being nice to me. No, I wasn't letting that bit of patronisation go unanswered. I'm not breaking the law by not wearing a mask. Ask the guards who came to the supermarket in December. I wasn't breaking the law there. I don't break the law. And I don't go to protests. The last protest I went to was around 2014 in relation to a woman's right to choose. Yes, I believe strongly in a woman's right to choose. But the pendulum has gone too far to an extent here in a certain way. I believe in abortion on demand and allowing abortion on demand. I don't believe in promoting it as something as a good thing. What do I mean by abortion on demand? What does abortion on demand mean? Abortion on demand doesn't mean that you walk into Tesco and get an abortion there in a little cubicle. What abortion on demand means is that the woman shall be the final judge of whether or not the procedure goes ahead. Yes, it's killing babies. Yes, it's a tragedy. Yes, it's evil. I know. But I can assure you I won't be getting an abortion. Nor would I actually promote it. Nor would I promote it, because there's terrible trauma surrounding it. Trauma before it, and particularly trauma afterwards. That's valid and it's real, and of course it's suppressed. But that doesn't mean that I don't believe that a woman should have the final say. Of course, it's her body. Of course a woman should have the final say. Of course she should. Women have been ending pregnancy since the beginning of time anyway. Look at Breege, or St. Bridget. She was an abortionist. Look closer at the story of St. Bridget. She was an abortionist. St. Bridget was in favour of a woman's right to choose. So women have been ending pregnancy since day one. You know? It's not going to end. You're not going to... This is, what you resist persists. So we do need a liberal abortion regime. And I think 14 weeks is far too harsh. Far too harsh for abortion on demand. Far too harsh. That's rushing a woman into a decision that she could be exceptionally remorseful for. It also, in specific instances, has not given people sufficient time to check if the baby has disabilities. It's tragic instances happening here, but this is what happens when you have a country run by evil psychopaths. And they are evil psychopaths. Let's get back to the issue of civil disobedience. Don't go to marches, don't go to protests, just don't. Just don't. Don't go to these things. Don't go to these things. Because you don't know, is a Bloody Sunday type of situation going to emerge? Are people going to come out with shooters? Like Bloody Sunday in Derry? I can assure you anybody who didn't go to that didn't get shot. And I'm not... Please don't assume that I'm disparaging the people who went to that civil rights march in Derry in 1972. It was dreadful. It was a terrible crime. What happened in Derry. I'm not in any way disparaging the people of Derry or the victims who were murdered that day in Derry in 1972. It was a very, very dark day. Terrible evil. Bloody Sunday was a terrible evil. Innocent people gunned down. And priests trying to help the dying on the streets of Derry. Appalling Bloody Sunday was. I'm not in any way supporting those who murdered them or the people who were, or in any way disparaging those murdered. But if they'd stayed away, it wouldn't have happened. That's a fact. The people who didn't go there that day didn't get shot. I'm not suggesting that people who protest legitimately, and it is your right to protest, that they should be shot at. Of course not. Now, what's going to happen as a result of yesterday in Dublin is that they're going to try and rush in, the psychopaths are going to try and rush in new laws to prevent people from protesting. Watch. Watch what happens. They are salivating at it. That thing McEntee, Helen McEntee, only got into the Dáil because she wrote on the pity points of her father killing himself. That's the truth. Not very nice to say it, but it's actually the hard truth. Helen McEntee hasn't got the talent to clean toilets. And she's becoming a little bit dog-eared anyway, so whatever talents she might have, they're drying out in the sun in front of us. But McEntee, was smirking, was doing the psychopathic tick smirk that her cult leader Varadkar does. Varadkar and Martin, another psychopath, were in a video about 2 weeks ago or 10 days ago in which they're smirking at the prospect of destroying the Irish hospitality industry. They were smirking. That didn't go unnoticed because people are spotting these things. Right. Are people going to wake up? No. Ray Mora, Karen and Dermot, Jack and Sophie, they're not going to wake up. They're not going to wake up. But that's not the problem. Part of our civil disobedience is also attacking the mainstream media. That's what I decided in February of 2020 when I saw that the Irish people were stupid enough to let 35 Fine Gaelers back in. At the time, before the election of 2020, February 2020 in Ireland, not the US one, in November. Before the Irish election, I said, if the Irish people let Fine Gael back in again, they deserve anything they got. They did, they do. That was when I pulled the plug on my having any positive political interest in this country. I just said they deserve anything they get. I'm now looking after myself. And I have. But that doesn't mean that I'm going to be just sitting at home bitching about it. No, what I'm going to do is, I said, well, I'm going to change my strategy here. I'm going to forget about being of the system, but I'm going to continue to be in the system in as much as I'm obeying the law with masks and all of that. But I'm going to go on an offensive against mainstream media. Then I got leave to take 2 judicial reviews regarding planning, and the judge said I had to get a decent webcam and a microphone, and the rest is history. So these things, there is synchronicity. Michael Collins led an ingenious campaign of civil disobedience. And what people did with the government was they just turned their backs. That's all they did. They just turned their backs. There were consequences to that. People were arrested, people were beaten up, people were jailed, people were shot, people lost a lot. Civil disobedience does not come without a price and does not come without risk. It's like litigating and planning, as I've done. That comes with risk. Now, when you're doing your paperwork in advance, you try to make sure you don't get an order of costs against you, but it still has a risk. Of course it does. So none of these things comes without a risk. But the way that we're going to get back our freedoms is not by consenting to vaccines. And it's not by wearing more masks. 2 masks, 3 masks, whatever. No, it's by civil disobedience. And it's by ignoring and turning our back on the mainstream media, whose job for a long time, but particularly acutely, we began to see it in 2020, is to promote the official establishment narrative. They promote it particularly in terrorising people, the Rays and Moras, regarding COVID-19. They didn't terrorise me because I knew they were liars. And what happened with my parents being tested negative for COVID-19, I didn't get tested, but I can have a bloody good guess. What happened is that we've proven them liars as well. I mean, what does that say? None of us took any precautions. I didn't. I didn't wear a mask, didn't socially distance, didn't do any of this. And I didn't manage to pass COVID-19 on to my parents, who are 90, 91, vulnerable, apparently. They're according to these Ray Mora types. That woman. How are your parents coping? How are you looking after them? I said, we're ignoring it. That's how, that has to be the paradigm and mindset behind civil disobedience. You have to stop taking these monsters seriously. Micheál Martin, Varadkar, McEntee, Conehead, Donnelly, Shane Ross. Shane Ross now has an article in today's Sunday Independent. It's time maybe for Simon and Tony to win back the trust of the public. Simon and Tony. Simon and Tony. Tony being the same Tony Holohan, who abused women dying of cervical cancer. That's it. That would be the same Tony, wouldn't it? Tony and Simon, because Leo's large. Oh, yeah. Leo's a lurge, but his time in the day, just like Helen McEntee, they're both fading in the sunlight, aren't they? So we've got to get some new stars on here. We've got Tony and Simon. If you buy into this, you deserve anything you get. Shane Ross. I mean, for goodness sake, Shane Ross. The man is a buffoon. Simon and Tony. We need to be looking at civil disobedience. What we learned from yesterday is what Thomas and I have said. Particularly Thomas. He said it a lot longer than I did it. Don't go to protests. They're a trap. They're a trap, protests are. Don't go to protests. You do your civil disobedience in other ways. You do it by what we're doing. Thomas and myself and all of these ones, Dave Collin, all the brilliant ones. We're doing our videos online. We're talking to people. We're communicating to people. We're accepting the fact that people are healing from the abuse of decades of a psychopathic control grid. When I was a child and a teenager and in my 20s, I did not realise the existence and significance of psychopaths and their control grid. I wish I had. But of course it's suppressed information, because they know, the psychopaths know that they're psychopaths to an extent. To an extent. In the howling wasteland between their ears, like Varadkar. I can hear the wind howling between Varadkar's ears. You look at the vacant look on its face. So don't go to protests, but that doesn't mean that you sit back and do nothing. Don't run for election. That doesn't mean that you sit back and do nothing. One of the greatest acts of civil disobedience, although it didn't turn out so well, was what Gemma O'Doherty and John Waters did by suing the state. Because that was different, and I know this myself. When you litigate, you can't ignore it. Yet they're never going to close down the High Court, because the High Court is also the stamping ground of the rich and powerful. So the High Court's where you will get, not always, but you will get a much more even playing field in the High Court. And Gemma and John know that. I think of all, Thomas describes them, all these ones, when you start questioning the COVID hoax, they go, how are you, Gemma? How are you? How are you, Gemma? They're not doing that now. They're not doing that now. And I'm even looking at Twitter now and social media today regarding the protests in Dublin yesterday, and the mainstream narrative is not sticking. That doesn't mean that the cheese brains, Thomas's wonderful analysis, a really good one actually, doesn't mean that they know what's happening. But what you do with the cheese brains is you have to sow one idea in their cheese brains that sticks. If you've done that, you'll win. That is how you win them over. Lenin knew that. Goebbels knew that. When you look at the rise of Hitler, something that a lot of even the broad range of academic narrators of the rise of Hitler, this is my own analysis, I suppose, not enough is made of the culpability of the nascent mainstream media in Germany at the time. This is the same thing we're witnessing here. They didn't speak out against Hitler in enough time to stop him. Had they done so, it could have turned out very differently. And this is what's happening here. The mainstream media has not spoken out about this. So at the same time, by the way, the government white paper on direct provision appears, I must read it, I've read a bit of it, I should read it actually, appears to be saying, and this is what I'm giving you now is not necessarily fact or my opinion, I'm reciting merely what is kind of floating around social media, that immigrants to Ireland will be allowed in unvetted, will not be deported, and after 4 months will get a free forever home. That may not be true, but that narrative has begun circulating out there. That is the start of fascism. What I mean is, if we don't have a far right now, that will be the seed from which it grows. Because if Irish people perceive that an unvetted quantity of immigrants is coming into this country, they're not being turned away and they're being given free forever homes, to borrow the term, that's not going to stick. That's nothing to do with COVID. That's to do with open borders and globalism. That could be problematic, and Again, what we're seeing is that insane groupthink at the mainstream. They're all celebrating it. You know, the Social Democrats and the Greens are all celebrating it. They're not reading the room here, I think. Because perception matters. Goebbels knew that, Lenin and Stalin knew that, Trotsky knew that. Perception matters. There is a perception now germinating that unvetted immigrants who come into Ireland will not be deported, and after 4 months they'll get a free forever home. Maybe true, maybe not. But what's true is that that perception has now already embedded itself. I was talking to a woman yesterday and she said it to me. You know, a normie woman. I was saying, why aren't they housing the Irish first? She said, why are they getting free forever homes after 4 months? I said, do you know the white paper? No, she said. I said, read it. Well, she said, I wouldn't be into that. Well, then don't comment. And I'm not commenting. I'm not going to comment substantially about it until I have read the white paper. And when I mean read from the top to the bottom. I can comment on Gemma O'Doherty and John Waters' case because I read the ruling and I've read the transcripts. I actually haven't read their originating papers. But the ruling is a good... You read the whole ruling. Because as far as I'm concerned, it's accurate. It's from a judge who I would regard well anyway. That's how I can comment. And I'm still not attacking them. It's not a personal attack against them. I do believe they went about it wrongly. But that's not an attack on them. I'm entitled to say that they went about it wrongly. But Gemma and John, you know, they spoke out. They did something rather than nothing. And they're fearless. They're both fearless. Gemma is totally fearless. She is a race baiter and all that, but she is fearless. You know, she's not a coward, and neither is John Waters. Neither, it's such a sad thing, neither are the freetards. You look at the freetards in court, you look at them down in Strokestown, they have balls. You know, they're not cowards. I respect them for that. It's such a shame that they fell in with this cult of freetard woo. Otherwise, they'd be invincible.